The first times my mother-in-law called me poor, she smiled when she said it. That somehow made it hurt more. It happened at a Sunday dinner 3 months after my husband Daniel and I got married. His family lived in a beautiful 2-story house on the edge of town. There was a long dining table that could seat 12 people, even though only 5 of us were there that night. Everything in that house seemed designed to remind visitors that money had been there before them, and would probably remain there long after they left. The silverware was polished, the wine glasses were crystal, the paintings on the walls were originals, and my mother-in-law, Victoria, wore a diamond necklace that seemed to sparkle every time she moved her head. I had come from a completely different world. My mother raised me alone after my father died when I was 8. We lived in a small apartment above a grocery store. My mother worked long hours, saved every dollar she could, and taught me that dignity had nothing to do with how much money sat in your bank account. So when I married Daniel, I knew his family was wealthy. I just never imagined they would use that wealth to measure my worth. That evening, Victoria looked at the handbag beside my chair. It was an old leather bag my mother had given me when I graduated from college. The leather was worn around the edges, the zipper sometimes stuck, and there was a tiny scratch near the handle. Victoria picked it up with 2 fingers. "Is this real leather?" I nodded. Yes, she examined it for another second. Interesting. Her tone made the word sound like an insult. Daniel immediately noticed. "Mom." "What?" she asked innocently. "I was only asking." Then she turned to me. "You know, Emma, Daniel could have married someone from a very different background." The room went quiet. I felt Daniel stiffen beside me. "Mom, don't start." Victoria laughed. "I'm not starting anything. I'm simply saying that marriage isn't only about love." I looked at her. "What is it about, then?" She smiled. "Compatibility, that word stayed with me, compatibility. What she really meant was money, status, connections, family name. I didn't argue that night. I didn't insult her. I didn't defend myself. I simply lowered my eyes and continued eating. Because I had learned something early in life. People who want to underestimate you usually reveal more about themselves than they ever learn about you. And Victoria had no idea who she was sitting across from. She thought I was a poor girl who had married into her wealthy family. She had no idea that I had spent years building something quietly. Something that would eventually make her regret every cruel word she had ever said to me. But before that happened, she would make my life miserable. And Daniel would slowly begin to believe her. Daniel and I met at a small bookstore. I was 29, he was 31. He had come in looking for a business book, and I was sitting in the corner reading a novel. He accidentally knocked over a display. Books fell everywhere. I laughed. He looked embarrassed. "You saw nothing." I saw everything. That was how it started. Not with money, not with status, not with some glamorous party. Just 2 strangers laughing over a pile of books. Over the next year, Daniel became my best friend. He knew my mother had died 2 years before we met. He knew I had grown up poor. He knew I worked 2 jobs while building my career. He knew everything. And he never once made me feel ashamed of it. That's why I believed his family would eventually accept me. I was wrong. Victoria met me for the first time at a restaurant. She was polite, too polite. She asked where I grew up, what my parents did, where I went to college, how much I earned. I remember answering requests honestly. When I told her my mother had worked as a seamstress, her expression changed, just slightly. But I noticed. "How charming," she said. I smiled. My mother was wonderful. Victoria took a sip of wine. I'm sure she was. Later that evening, Daniel walked me to my car. "Don't worry about my mom," he said. "Does she hate me?" He laughed. "No, she barely spoke to me. That's how she acts when she doesn't know what to say." I smiled. "That's reassuring." He kissed my forehead. "I love you." I believed him. And for a while, that was enough. After our wedding, Victoria became more direct. She began making little comments. At first, they were easy to dismiss. "You don't need to spend money on expensive clothes, Emma. Some people simply aren't comfortable with luxury." Or, "Don't worry about contributing to the family events. We understand that your situation is different." Or, "Daniel has always lived a certain lifestyle. I hope you don't expect him to change." I tried to laugh. Daniel usually ignored the comments. That was the problem. He didn't defend me. He simply hoped they would stop. They didn't. They became worse. One Saturday afternoon, Victoria hosted a family brunch. There were 8 people at the table. Daniel's older sister, Caroline, was there with her husband. Their cousin Mark was there, and so was Victoria's closest friend, Susan. Halfway through brunch, Victoria brought up vacation plans. "We're going to Switzerland in December." Caroline smiled. "Again? Of course." Then Victoria looked at me. "You probably haven't traveled much internationally, have you, Emma?" I put down my fork. No, not really. That's what I thought. Caroline laughed quietly. Victoria continued. Don't worry. Maybe one day you'll be able to afford it. The table went silent. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Mom. Victoria raised her hands. What? I'm encouraging her. I looked at Daniel. He looked at his plate. Something inside me cracked, not because of Victoria. Because he had said nothing. After brunch, I confronted him in the car. Why didn't you defend me? He sighed. Emma, she's my mother and I'm your wife, I know. Then act like it. He rubbed his forehead. You know how she is. No, I know how you're allowing her to be. He didn't answer. That night, I cried in the bathroom so Daniel wouldn't hear me. I didn't want him to choose between his mother and me. I wanted him to understand that marriage required him to protect the person he had chosen, but instead, he kept trying to keep everyone happy. And when you try to keep everyone happy, you usually end up hurting the person who expects the least from you. 3 months later, Victoria called me. Emma, we're having a family dinner next Friday. Okay. I need you to dress appropriately. I frowned. What does that mean? It's an important dinner. What's the occasion? She hesitated. The family is discussing Daniel's future. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? You'll understand when you come. Then she hung up. I told Daniel. He looked surprised. She didn't tell me anything. She said it's about your future. He shrugged. Probably business, I nodded. But something felt wrong. Friday arrived. I wore a simple navy dress. It wasn't expensive, but it was elegant. Daniel wore a suit. When we arrived, Victoria opened the door. Her eyes traveled from my shoes to my dress. That's what you're wearing? I looked down. Is there a problem? She sighed. I suppose it's fine. Then she turned to Daniel. You look handsome. She kissed him. She barely acknowledged me. Inside, I noticed several unfamiliar people. An attorney, a financial advisor, a man I recognized from a business magazine, and Victoria's brother, Richard. Daniel looked confused, too. What's going on? Victoria smiled. Sit down, we did. Dinner was served. Nobody touched the food. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. We should discuss the family trust. I looked at Daniel. He looked at me. Victoria spoke. Daniel will eventually become the managing partner of the family company. Daniel blinked. I thought Dad wanted Caroline to handle that. Your father changed his mind. Caroline immediately looked angry. Why wasn't I told? Because this decision was made recently. Then Victoria looked at me. There's one condition. I felt something cold move through my chest, Daniel asked. What condition? Victoria folded her hands. Your marriage. Silence. What about it? Daniel asked. Daniel, your father built this company over 40 years. We cannot risk its future. I stared at her. Risk? She looked directly at me. I'm sure you understand. I suddenly realized where this was going. She believed I was after Daniel's money. She believed I had married him because he was wealthy. She believed I was a threat. Victoria continued. Daniel needs a prenuptial agreement. Daniel's jaw tightened. We're already married. Then we need a postnuptial agreement. I looked at him. Do you know about this? No. Victoria interrupted. It's not all personal. I almost laughed. Of course it was personal. It was the most personal thing anyone could say. She was telling me that after marrying her son, I was still considered an outsider, a risk. A poor woman waiting to take something that wasn't hers. I stood up. I'm going home. Daniel stood. Emma, no. I looked at Victoria. You've made your opinion very clear. Then I walked out. Daniel followed me. He grabbed my hand. Wait. I turned around. Are you going to sign it? He hesitated. That hesitation was enough. I pulled my hand away. Good night, Daniel. I drove home alone. That night, I opened the safe in my closet. Inside was a folder. I had never shown it to Daniel, not because I didn't trust him, because I had promised my mother. The folder contained documents relating to a company called Hartwell Holdings. 20 years ago, my mother had worked for the founder, Daniel's father, Robert Hartwell. But there was more. My mother hadn't been a seamstress all her life. Before that, she had worked as Robert Hartwell's private financial administrator. She had helped him establish the first version of the family trust. And when Robert's first business nearly collapsed, my mother had invested her own savings to keep it alive. She never asked for recognition. She never wanted it. But Robert had never forgotten. Before my mother died, she gave me a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter from Robert Hartwell. It said, "Your mother saved my company when nobody else believed in me." I promised her that if the company ever became what I dreamed it could become, her daughter would never have to struggle the way she did. There were legal documents attached, shares, trust agreements, investment records. My mother had quietly retained ownership of a small percentage of Hartwell Holdings. And when she died, those shares passed to me. I had never told Daniel. I had never told anyone. The value had grown significantly over the years. I wasn't a billionaire, but I certainly wasn't poor, and I had never married Daniel for his money. In fact, when we met, I already had more financial security than he knew. I simply chose to live modestly. Because my mother taught me that wealth was something to protect, not something to display. I looked at the documents that night, then I whispered, "Mom, I think it's time." The following week, Victoria invited me to lunch. I almost refused, but I wanted to understand what she was planning. She arrived at my apartment wearing an expensive coat. She looked around, then she smiled. "This place is very small. I like it. You could live somewhere better if Daniel moved you into one of his properties." "I don't need him to." She raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting attitude." I sat across from her. "Why did you invite me?" She placed a folder on the table. "The agreement. I didn't touch it. You want me to sign this? I want you to protect my son." I stared at her. "From me?" "From financial uncertainty." She leaned closer. "Let's be honest, Emma. You came from nothing." I felt my hands tighten beneath the table. "You don't know what I came from. I know enough," she continued. "Daniel has responsibilities. I understand. He can't risk his inheritance. I haven't asked for his inheritance. Not yet." That sentence stayed in the air. Then Victoria said the words I would never forget. "Women from your background often marry into wealthy families because they want a better life." I stood. "You should leave." She looked surprised. "I'm trying to help you." "No, you're trying to make me ashamed of being poor." She smiled coldly. "Then perhaps you should stop pretending you belong in our family." I stared at her. "One day you'll regret saying that," she laughed. "I don't think so." She picked up her handbag. "I think you'll eventually realize that Daniel deserves someone who can stand beside him without being carried." Then she walked away. I stood in the middle of my apartment, and for the first time I wasn't hurt. I was angry. Not because she thought I was poor, because she believed being poor made someone less worthy of love. That evening, Daniel came home. He looked exhausted. "Mom told me what happened." I folded my arms. "Did she?" "Emma, she says you're refusing to sign the agreement." "I am." "Why?" "Because I don't want to send a document that says I entered our marriage for money," he sighed. "She wants security." "What do you want?" He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "I want peace." I stared at him. "Peace? Yes. That's what you want?" "Emma, I'm caught between you and my family." "No." I shook my head. "You aren't caught between us. You're standing in the middle, refusing to choose." He looked angry. "Why should I choose?" "Because your mother has made me an enemy. She's scared." "Of what?" "Of losing me. I laughed bitterly. Then why'd she keep pushing me away?" He had no answer. I walked into the bedroom. Daniel followed. "Please don't do this." "Do what?" "Make me choose." I turned around. "I've been choosing you every day since we met." He looked at me. "And I need you to choose me now." He lowered his eyes. "I need time." Something inside me went quiet. "Take all the time you need." I packed a small suitcase. Daniel watched. "Where are you going?" "To my mother's house." "She's gone." "I know." I looked around the apartment. "I just need to be somewhere that reminds me who I am." For the next 3 weeks, I stayed alone. Daniel called. I didn't answer. He sent messages. I read them. But I didn't respond. During that time, I contacted my mother's old attorney. His name was Samuel Reed. He was 72 and had known my mother for decades. When I showed him Victoria's proposed agreement, he smiled sadly. I wondered when this day would come. "What do you mean?" He opened a locked cabinet. Inside was another file. "Your mother asked me to keep this until you were ready." My heart stopped. "What is it?" "Instructions from Robert Hartwell." I opened the file. There were letters, contracts, and one document that changed everything. Robert had established a special trust. My mother was the original beneficiary. I was the successor. But the trust contained a clause. If the Hartwell family intended to remove or financially pressure a beneficiary based on social status, marriage, or family relationships, certain voting rights would be transferred to me. I stared at Samuel. "What does that mean?" He smiled. "It means your mother was merely an employee." "Who was she?" Samuel leaned back. "Your mother was one of the people who built Hartwell Holdings." I couldn't speak. Robert trusted her more than anyone. "Why didn't she tell me?" "Because she didn't want money to become your identity." I looked at the papers. "How much do I own?" Samuel gave me a number. I nearly dropped the folder. It was far more than I had imagined. My mother hadn't left me a fortune to spend. She had left me influence, and the trust was connected directly to the company, including the decision Victoria was trying to make about Daniel. Samuel looked at me. "What do you want to do?" I closed the folder. "I don't want revenge." He smiled. "Good. Then what? Truth." I nodded. "Then let's tell the truth. 2 weeks later, Hartwell Holdings held its annual family meeting. Everyone was there. Victoria, Daniel, Caroline, Richard, the board members, the attorneys. I arrived with Samuel. Victoria looked shocked. Emma? I smiled. Good morning. She looked at Samuel. What is this? Samuel answered calmly. We're here on behalf of Emma Parker. Victoria laughed nervously. This is a private family meeting. Samuel opened his briefcase. Actually, Mrs. Hartwell, it is a shareholder meeting. The room went silent. Daniel stared at me. Emma, what's happening? I looked at him. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Victoria stood. What is she doing here? Samuel placed a document on the table. Because Emma Parker is a beneficiary and voting shareholder of the Hartwell Family Trust. Victoria's face changed. What? Samuel continued. Her mother, Margaret Parker, was one of the original architects of the company's financial structure. Richard stood. That's impossible. No, Samuel looked at him. It's documented. He handed out copies. Victoria picked one up. Her hands began shaking. Daniel looked at me. You knew? I knew some of it. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to love me without knowing. He stared at me. I continued. When your mother called me poor, I didn't correct her. Victoria looked at me. You knew? Yes. And you let me think. Because I wanted to see whether you would treat me differently if you thought I had nothing. She couldn't answer. Samuel placed another document on the table. This is the trust provision regarding discriminatory financial conditions imposed upon beneficiaries. Richard frowned. What does that mean? It means the proposed post-nuptial agreement cannot be used as a condition of Emma's continued relationship with the family trust. Victoria looked terrified. That's not possible. Samuel smiled. It is. Then I spoke. I never wanted your money. Victoria stared at me. You've been lying to us. No, I shook my head. You simply assumed I was someone I wasn't. Daniel stood. Emma, why didn't you tell me? I looked at him. Because I wanted to know whether you would defend me when you thought I had nothing. His face fell, and I failed. I didn't answer. Because he was right. Everyone thought that was the end. It wasn't. Samuel reached into his briefcase again. There is one more matter. Victoria looked at him. What now? Samuel placed a letter on the table. It was written by Robert Hartwell. He had written it before his death. Samuel read the first part aloud. I built this company with many people. Some names appear on the walls, some never will. But one protected this company when my own family nearly destroyed it. Everyone looked at Victoria. She became pale. Samuel continued. Margaret Parker, I looked down. My mother, the letter went on. Robert explained that years earlier, Richard had secretly attempted to sell company assets. My mother discovered it. She stopped him. But instead of exposing him publicly, she quietly protected the company and gave Richard another chance. Richard looked furious. That's ancient history. Samuel shook his head. No, he pulled out Fano records. Because you attempted the same thing again 6 months ago. The room erupted. Victoria looked at her brother. Richard? He said nothing. Daniel looked horrified. Uncle? Samuel explained that Richard had been attempting to move assets into a private company. My mother's trust had detected the transaction. That was why the family had suddenly become interested in controlling Daniel's marriage and inheritance. They weren't protecting the family. They were trying to protect themselves. Victoria had been attacking me because she believed I was the obstacle. But she had been looking in the wrong direction. I wasn't trying to take their money. I was the person who could expose where the money was going. The meeting ended with Richard being removed from his position. The family attorney launched an investigation. Victoria stayed behind. So did Daniel. She approached me. For the first time since I had met her, she looked small. Not powerful. Not wealthy. Just tired. I owe you an apology. I didn't respond. She continued. I judged you, yes. I thought you were after Daniel's money. I know. I thought you didn't belong. I looked at her. You made sure I knew it. She lowered her head. I was wrong. I didn't expect those words. Maybe because some part of me had spent months waiting for them. But when they finally came, they didn't feel as satisfying as I imagined. Because an apology doesn't erase humiliation. It only acknowledges it. Victoria whispered. Can you forgive me? I thought about my mother. She had spent her life believing people could change. But she had also taught me something else. Forgiveness didn't mean returning to the same place that hurt you. So I answered honestly, I can forgive you. Victoria looked up. But things will never be the way they were, she nodded. I understand. Daniel waited until we were alone. He looked at me for a long time. I was wrong. I said nothing. I should have defended you. Yes. I should have trusted you. Yes. I let my mother make you feel like you weren't good enough for me. I looked at him. You did. He swallowed. Is it too late? That was the hardest question, because I still loved him. Despite everything, but love doesn't automatically repair trust. I don't know. He nodded. I'll wait. How long? As long as you need. I looked at him. Why? Because I finally understand something. What? You never needed money. C smiled sadly. You only needed me to stand beside you. Tears filled my eyes. Yes. He took a step toward me. I should have done that from the beginning. I didn't immediately hug him. I didn't immediately forgive him. I simply held his hand. Sometimes rebuilding a marriage doesn't begin with a kiss. It begins with accountability. Months passed. Richard was gone from the company. The trust was restructured. I accepted a position on the board. Not because I wanted power. Because I wanted to make sure what my mother had protected would never be abused again. Victoria changed too. Not overnight, but slowly. She began visiting my mother's grave. The first time I saw her there, I didn't know what to say. She placed flowers on the stone. I wish I had met her. I looked at her. You wouldn't have judged her the way you judged me. Victoria smiled sadly. Probably not. She looked at the name engraved on the stone. She raised a remarkable daughter. I almost cried. She did. Victoria nodded. I finally understand why you never fought back. I looked at her. Why? Because you didn't need to prove anything. I smiled. Exactly. A year after the dinner where Victoria first called me poor, our family gathered again. This time the table was smaller. There were no business documents, no lawyers, no arguments about money. Victoria sat beside me. She placed a small box in front of me. What's this? Open it. Inside was my mother's old sewing thimble. I froze. Where did you get this? Victoria smiled. Your mother gave it to Robert years ago. I touched it carefully. I thought it was lost. Robert kept it. She paused. He told me once that your mother was the strongest woman he'd ever known. I looked at Victoria. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was too proud. We both laughed quietly. Daniel squeezed my hand. Victoria raised her glass. To Emma. Everyone lifted their glasses. I smiled, but before drinking I just said, to my mother. Everyone nodded, and in that moment I realized something. The greatest revenge wasn't making Victoria feel poor. It wasn't taking control of the company. It wasn't proving that I had more money than she imagined. The greatest revenge was becoming the woman she had once claimed I could never be. Who didn't need anyone's approval. A woman who could forgive without forgetting. A woman who could walk away from money without fear. And a woman who finally understood that her worth had never depended on what was in her bank account. Epilogue. What my mother taught me years later, people sometimes ask me how I handled everything. They expect me to say that money saved me. It didn't. Money only revealed the truth. It revealed who loved me, who respected me, who feared losing control, and who only respected me after discovering said something they wanted. But the real lesson came from my mother. She once told me, never let someone convince you that your circumstances determine your value. I didn't understand what she meant when I was young. I do now. Being poor isn't shameful. Being wealthy isn't proof of character. A family name doesn't make someone better, and inheritance doesn't make someone worthy. Character does, loyalty does, compassion does, and love does. Victoria once looked at my old handbag and saw a poor woman. She looked at my apartment and saw someone beneath her. She looked at my family background and decided I wasn't good enough for her son. But she never bothered to look at my heart. She never asked what my mother had taught me. She never asked what I had sacrificed. She never asked what kind of woman I had become. She judged the cover and missed the entire story. That was her mistake. But I made one too. I believed that staying quiet would protect my marriage. It didn't. Sometimes silence protects the wrong person. Sometimes you have to speak. Not to prove your worth, but to protect it. And if someone only respects you after discovering your money, your position, your inheritance, or your power, then their respect was never really respect. It was fear. I learned that the hard way, but I learned it, and I will never forget it. Because the woman my mother raised wasn't a poor daughter-in-law trying to fit into a wealthy family. She was a woman who had been wealthy in the ways that actually mattered long before anyone knew her name. And when the truth finally came out, I didn't have to take revenge. I simply stepped aside and let the truth speak for itself. Lesson learned. Never measure a person's worth by what they own. The quietest person in the room may be carrying the greatest story, and sometimes, the people who look down on you are only revealing how little they understand your value.